Hello everyone, this is Tom Uren. I'm here with another Between Two Nerds discussion and the Grugq. G'day Grugq, how are you?
G'day Tom, I'm fine, and yourself?
I'm very well. This week's edition is brought to you by Airlock Digital. Airlock makes a application whitelisting solution for your endpoints to keep them safe and secure. Find them at airlockdigital.com. So, Grugq, you sent me actually quite an old blog post by Dave Eitel, who used to, once upon a time, work for NSA, and he's got a technical, I think, exploit writing type background, and he is a policy aficionado, so he's written quite a lot about policy as well. So this post is actually almost a decade old, 2016, and it was, I guess, inspired by a post on Lawfare, which was about the important cyber conflict questions and answers. So I think part of it is interesting to me is that it's just a bit of a, what's the word, a time capsule of what people were thinking a while ago.
I would point out, just very briefly, in the middle of getting their asses kicked in the information domain by Russia, this was... this was the topic of conversation. But yes, that's...
and so Dave Eitel took a crack at how do we define cyber power. And he came up with what I think of as quite a technical answer. So he talks about, and his blog post, which is quite short, talks about exploitation, implantation, exfiltration and analysis, integration into other capabilities like HUMIT, and effect. What struck me as interesting is that this is a very technical way to approach cyber power, and since that time several different think tank type bodies have taken a crack at what is cyber power, and none of them would have used any of these criteria at all, and they're looking much more at what it achieves for a state rather than how good your technical capabilities are.
Right. So I think one of the interesting analogies to think about would be like the Toyota War in, I think it was between Chad and Tunisia or Libya. Don't quote me on that. But anyway, you had one state that had like T-55s from Russia and some other sort of like quite advanced military equipment, and another state that had AKs, machine guns, and Toyota trucks. And they made these huge technical armies, or like basically they put machine guns or rocket launchers onto Toyota trucks and then just drove them through the desert, and they were able to defeat the other army because they could just like swarm them, hit them, move away, cross deserts that they couldn't.
Right. All
All of this stuff, and that they could maintain their equipment. If you're a dictator with a whole bunch of Soviet gear, it's unlikely you have an army that can service your tanks if they have problems. Whereas if you have a whole bunch of like Toyota Hilux diesel trucks, as long as you've got a rock, a stick, and a piece of bendy wire, you could probably fix anything with it. So yeah, like if you were talking about military power and you started measuring who has more tanks, you would very quickly come away with, this is a lopsided engagement, and it's going to be a crushing victory for the one with the most hardware and military power. Whereas, in fact, contextually, what turned out to be much better was investment in things that actually made sense for that domain, that area of operation and stuff. And I think it's a little bit like this in that you have people looking at, say, like the Abrams, or the American hardware, and saying like, this is the best military you could ever have. And then if you were to drop it into like a swamp and be like, all right, or it defeat a bunch of small Vietnamese people who have been fighting for 1,000 years and really don't like you. Having the most tanks ceases to be a useful metric of military power, right? Like it's just, I think it's similar to that, and that it's, if you're trying to achieve your aims, it's not necessarily the most tanks that's going to help you out. And I think in this case, having like the most technically capable intelligence service is great, but I don't know that that's the necessary criteria for having an effective cyber.
Right, yeah. So ITEL's got a nice graph chart down at the bottom where it's got different axes, persistence, sourcing, and networking. And so you get this kind of triangle features inside, and the bigger the triangle, the kind of better an agency is. And that seemed to me to be a good way of comparing the technical capabilities of agencies if you could get accurate measurements on whatever dimensions you chose. But it doesn't necessarily tell you how well they're applied or what they achieve for the state themselves.
Right. I think that those are in descending order of importance. Like, what does it achieve for the state? How well can you apply the capabilities that you have? And then how good are the capabilities that you have?
Right.
And so a measure of like capability, that's a useful thing, but it's very, very low down on the ladder in terms of sort of understanding how powerful cyber has made the state, or how powerful cyber is for the state.
You see, so I'm thinking of a sporting analogy where you can have very, very highly skilled teams that are just, in certain sports, size and speed really matters. So being technically skilled allows you to get beaten to a pulp.
Right.
Less badly.
Right. So you could be an amazingly skilled rugby player, but unless you're 6'6" and 250 kilos of solid muscle, it's not really going to do you very much good when the All Blacks come running. Like there's just...
Yeah. So I think that to me is like an analogy that kind of works. Like the technical is part of the answer, but it's not the whole answer. So we had a podcast a while ago where we talked about whether cyber power could be strategic and in the sense that it could influence the fate of nations. So that was BTN 117. Actually earlier this year. That's right. Our conclusion at that time was that yes, it can, but it's not the same sort of power as like military power, and that it tends to be incremental and occur over a long period of time. And I guess one example we spoke about a bit was the Chinese theft of intellectual property. And over a long time, decades, I think that that's had quite a significant effect on the Chinese economy and its manufacturing prowess.
Right. But I think it would also be a mistake to chalk everything up to only that.
Yes,
right? Like it's not just that they stole things, it's that they sort of operationalized what they stole and then built on it. That they were able to sort of use it and make it work for their national power base. Like the things that they wanted to do as a state, it helped them. Like the US could steal far more intellectual property than China could, just in terms of volume, right? And they could probably do it without getting caught. But so what? Like it wouldn't help them. Like it's not a useful thing for them to do. And even if it was a useful thing for them to do, I think we've discussed this, that they would have a lot of difficulty actually integrating it into their economy in a way. Like they wouldn't be able to convert what they've stolen into state power directly, whereas I think obviously China has. So they've in a way you could say that they've integrated cyber better into their state power matrix.
Yeah, so that was BTN 120. Should US spies steal Chinese commercial secrets?
Yeah,
what I was going to say...
This is our recap episode.
What I was going to say is that the stealing of intellectual property was just one part of a broader strategy. So they had a lot of different things that were aligned: trade policy, industrial policy, theft of intellectual property.
Internal economic policy, where I saw a discussion with a China expert who was speaking about how does China succeed so well? How do they produce these giant companies? And part of the thing is that they're very willing to accept a lot of corruption and problems at the early stage. So they will fund, like if you show up and you say, I want to be an electronic vehicle manufacturer, they will fund you, even if it's like you're the nephew of the mayor and your big plan is to, take out $1 million and then put a sign up over your garage saying, EV research department, and do nothing but spend the money. Like, they'll accept that because there'll be enough people who really do it that you'll end up with an ecosystem where they have to compete against each other in this sort of very vicious, race to the bottom on prices, but also race to the top on quality. And what you have left is sort of like these gladiator companies that have defeated all of their rivals. And then not only that, because all of their rivals have lost out after investing in factories, after investing in infrastructure, these winner companies can then gobble up that infrastructure and make themselves even bigger. So you end up, it's a lot like actually how Silicon Valley approaches things, where you fund a lot of startups and some of them win and a lot of them don't. And that's sort of the approach that China has, but at a state level to things that it cares about.
Right, yeah. So I think what's interesting there is that they're bringing all those different mechanisms or tools together in a single purpose. And for me, it seems like the US has not really done that using cyber except for intelligence gathering. Right. And so it makes it very hard to say the US has won in the cyber domain because it collected the most, it did the best at collection intelligence.
It got caught the fewest number of times per gigabyte of data stolen. Right?
That's right. And I think collecting intelligence is very important. It makes a difference. It makes a difference to the decisions that you make. But it's very hard to see how it's made a difference after 20 years. And so when it comes to measuring the success of cyber power, I'd have to put China ahead of the US with the caveat that I've got no idea.
Right. I mean, we don't know about the successes that have never been publicized. But I think I'd go a little bit further than that as well. Actually, that we could measure like how powerful has cyber been? Not just is this a cyber power, but how powerful has cyber been for this state? And I think China is like far and away the leader. But I think a close second is going to be Russia, if you include the information domain, which I do. Like I would say that that's part of it. I'd say that they have achieved their state goals far more frequently with the use of cyber than any other state that I'm aware of. Oh, and I would then say North Korea with Lazarus, again, is an exceptional cyber power, even though they're financially motivated and they're only stealing crypto. Like,
right.
That's what they want to do.
Yeah. So what is interesting to me about that list is that the more, the weaker a country is in terms of traditional, I guess I call them instruments of power. So there's that definition where you break down the state instruments of power to diplomatic, informational, military, and economic. And over the last 30 years, you'd have to say that for the vast majority of the time, most of the time, the US would be ahead on most of those.
Right. Which is probably why they like that metric.
Yeah. But the weaker a state is, the more that it's relied on cyber. So it's like North Korea. Probably you'd rank them the bottom on those four, the dime metric.
Not a huge power in any of those other metrics, but
and so it's relied on cyber the most. And because it's an asymmetric, and then it's kind of in reverse order. So Russia next, because
they're pretty good, to it. But they're a middling power on all of the other levels.
Yeah, and I also like you say that they've been very successful. They've been successful kind of narrowly, but it hasn't really helped their economy or their military in Ukraine.
I think they haven't been able to take advantage of the success.
Right.
Maybe. I think they've achieved their goals in terms of what the operations were supposed to do, generally speaking. But then I don't know that they've been able to capitalize on that. China, on the other hand, is obviously very tightly integrated, and they've managed, at least most of the time, to capitalize on their successes. So I think that in terms of like the number of operations that they've done that have been successful, it might be a comparable number, but China has exploited a far greater percentage of those operations than Russia has. So Russia has done things that have worked and then sort of fumbled it.
Right. And so when you say things that have worked, do you mean like interfering with the presidential election, sowing...
Right. Discord in the basically, helping to force the sort of poisoning the well in terms of political discourse, which they played some role in the US. Obviously not the only role, but they were certainly successful in... Their goal was to make greater animosity and more fractures, and that happened. And they were trying to achieve that. Now, whether that would have happened without them is possible, maybe even probable, but we don't know because we can't run it a second time. Like, we can't redo those years. So I'm going to chalk that up to as a success. But they haven't really benefited from that massively. Like, they haven't been able to exploit that. On the other hand, I think that they played a big role in getting Brexit to happen, which wasn't with cyber. It was a lot more with money. Like, they invested into the Leave campaigns. And I think that was successful for them. They got what they wanted. But I'm not sure that they were able to exploit that either.
Yeah, it feels like they've been successful at being a spoiler for other people, but they haven't... Like, they've stopped other people scoring goals but haven't actually scored goals of their own.
Yeah, I'm getting this feeling like it's a little bit like they're biting off more than they can chew. Like, they can actually do the bite. Like, they can certainly do this big grand vision thing that they have, like the first parts of it. But then once they've done that, it sort of falls apart because they can't. They're not powerful enough to actually exploit these sort of conditions that they create.
Yeah, so I'm not convinced how much difference they've actually made in terms of, I think they're...
Advancing the state.
Yeah, I think they're advancing what is going on, or they're pushing in the same direction as what is going on anyway. So it's like they're pushing on an open door. How much difference does that make? I'm not sure. But I agree that they're pushing in the same direction as things have turned out. So they haven't hurt it, certainly. Yeah, like in my view, they've been more successful in some regions than in others. Like they have been, in terms of information operations, they've been pushing, in the US at least, on this, we need to stop helping Ukraine. Defeat is inevitable. Yep. And all of that's been very successful. It hasn't immediately, like, it has stopped help for Ukraine. It's become part of
times, and it's
become part of the debate.
Absolutely.
The narratives that they push.
Yes. So that's been very successful. And I think it's worked for them, and I think it's generally working for them. But I think that the problem is that the invasion of Ukraine has created conditions that are so unfavorable to Russia that information narratives are not sufficient to change the field in any way. Right? Like, you can convince the US not to help Ukraine with money or whatever, but Europe, being so close to the actual conflict, has existential fears that are coming up, which you can't sort of argue away as you can with someone who's a continent and an ocean away, right? Like, it's much more visually present for them. So they are unlikely to be swayed by narratives, whereas someone much further away is more open to be swayed by narratives. So I don't think that the information stuff can work for them in the conditions that they've created. Like, they've actually... they've used their military to work against their cyber, and I think the military is stronger in this case.
Right. So I guess this is coming up to the what are the limits of cyber power, I guess. And so to me, the very question, how do we measure cyber power? This whole discussion, it's like, in some dimensions, the US is probably the best. Like, technically, they probably have the best tools and techniques or whatever.
The number of people working on it, or the amount of money invested, or the number of, like, the square footage of parking lots devoted for people who are employed exclusively in cyber. You know, there's a large number of metrics you could come up with that the U.S. is far and away the winner. I don't think one of those metrics is how far has cyber advanced the interests of the state. Like, I think that's an area where whatever it's doing for them, it's not public, and it's in the realms of informing decisions rather than affecting the world, shaping the environment.
Yeah. So this is a dilemma, I guess. The more powerful the state, the less useful cyber is. Is that is that what we're saying?
I think that might be the paradox in a way. Like, the more powerful, like the more you can invest in cyber, the less you need it, maybe. Or like the less it can do for you.
I guess the less of a game changer it is, maybe.
Yeah.
Like, because if the US had the will, it could change the game with military
it could
power.
do anything. It could do it with just leaning economic pressure on people. Like, it could use any of the instruments of national power from DIME, the diplomatic, informational, military, economic, any of those. It's so overpowered that cyber sort of doesn't even enter into it as a thing that they need to consider.
So at this point, it seems that China is becoming more of a peer adversary, is close to, if it's not already.
Right.
And so that would imply that cyber becomes less and less useful for the PRC because it's got other tools. I actually
do believe that, yeah.
Because it's got other tools that would be more effective.
And also, I think that the way that they've been using the information they've stolen, that all that IP, has been to bootstrap their own economy and their own industries, but then they're not resting on their laurels and just saying, well, any advances that happen, we'll just steal those as well, right? Like, they are investing now. Like, I think Huawei has a $30 billion R&D budget or something insane like that. I think if there's a Bell Labs producing the new technology of the future, it's more likely to be in China than in the US these days. There's more money flowing into things, and there's probably more intellectual freedom to work on long shots that are aligned with goals, even if there's less political freedom to, disagree with what those goals are or whatever. But you certainly you have the space to work within the system and go very, very far because it supports you so much. And I think that maybe that's what counts, right? Like, maybe if you want to be a powerful state, maybe you don't actually need political freedoms. You just need to be able to integrate all those tools and use them. All of which is to say that because China has sort of bootstrapped itself so far with so much already, I think that there's diminishing returns to keep stealing more information. I think that the lead that the U.S. has is getting shorter and shorter, and I think China is probably advancing perhaps beyond them in some areas. So it's less useful now to have cyber to augment yourself because there's just less that it can do for you.
I guess in the last couple of years, there's been the Salt Typhoon group, which is focused on compromising US and other telecommunications.
If you look at it, they're switching more towards an NSA-style operation.
Like intelligence gathering.
Right. But they're turning away from economic focus to a more political, I guess, political intelligence focus.
Yeah, it's always hard to tell if it's a shift when it's public reporting. Like, it's hard to get a picture of the whole landscape. But yeah, that's where I was going with that as well, by mentioning Salt Typhoon. That would be consistent with our hypothesis.
Yeah, and although just to push back on what I've just said and what we both agreed on is Salt Typhoon happening now because they're more interested in doing intelligence collection, or because they now have the capability to do that? So I would argue that they had the capability before, right? Like, it's hacking telcos is not it's not flying to Mars. So I don't think that it's like they've suddenly leveled up to the point that now they can do telco hacking. You know, they've been doing telco hacking for a long time. I think they've leveled up to the point where telco hacking is something that's more useful than, like Boston Robotics hacking.
So in this big picture world, where China and the US are close to peers, our prediction is that cyber becomes less and less relevant because they've got other options that are more useful.
Right.
And so in the future, we'll see Russia still being a spoiler, causing countries to kick own goals despite never kicking a goal itself. North Korea, I guess, will continue to be a cyber power
until they launch their own blockchain, at which point,
and I guess in a way they're also experimenting with different forms of money raising, I suppose.
Yeah.
I guess they too are bumping up against the limits of cyber power because they're just
there's only so much crypto you can steal.
getting people to apply for jobs, not particularly cybery.
It's probably not as lucrative as draining an exchange of their cash reserves. There's we haven't mentioned Iran. Right. And so Iran has some cyber capabilities, but then I wonder how useful for Iran can those capabilities be, given how weak they are in the other dimensions, but also how limited cyber is for what they're trying to achieve. Right. Like, can cyber stop other countries from invading or attacking them? No. Like, can cyber get them nuclear capabilities? No. Like, can cyber jumpstart their economy? Well, no, because they're sanctioned to hell. Given our thing of the more powerful you are, the less useful cyber is. I think there might also be a bottom floor of, if you are below this level of economic integration into the global economy, cyber can't help you either. Right?
I actually think of it as the other way around, where Iran is actually a lot bigger and more integrated than North Korea. And so it's got options in terms of selling oil.
Right.
Maybe they're not great options, but they're better than...
North Korea's, whatever they have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, North Korea steals billions, which is significant for North Korea. I think if Iran stole billions, it would be not that significant because it's a bigger country. It would
cover 2 days of government spending or something, right?
Or
whatever it is. But it wouldn't be a double-digit part of their GDP.
Yeah, it's not a game changer. And I guess it's I suppose it's the same dynamic as for the US, where cyber is not a game changer.
Maybe it's Iran's aspirations don't align with cyber's strong points. So, similarly, I think you could say that the Netherlands has been very successful when they've applied themselves to cyber. Like, they punch way above their weight in terms of skills and capability, but they're the Netherlands, right? Like, just how much advantage could they get, given that contextually they can't steal everything and then pour it all into their industrial base and build up as an industrial power, right? That they can't steal billions of crypto and have it massively boost their budgets. They can't influence, let's say, British political narratives and have it somehow help them in a way. Are the things that cyber has been proven good at useful for like France or Germany or the Netherlands? Like, are those dimensions where cyber power helpful for these states? I think that's probably where the U.S. lands as well, in that there's a lot of diminishing returns, but also there's not a lot of space to take advantage of those power dynamics.
I was just thinking about the amount of money that states tend to spend on intelligence collection, and it's like significant, but in terms of an overall national budget, it's like a drop in the bucket. And compared to defence, like it's a fraction of the defence budget. And so
cyber is a fraction of the intelligence budget. So you're...
Yep.
You know.
And I think that puts it in perspective. And we're cyber people always wanting it to be the, the thing that'll change the planet.
Clearly, all of these states are just very misguided. If they were to invest as much in cyber as they invest in the military, yes, cyber people think that cyber is special, that cyber has this outsized role to play, and I agree with that. But I think in terms of like proportion overall, it's very small. Like I think it can do more than it's actually doing. Like I think there's room to improve how you use cyber and how you can exploit it and so on. But I don't think that that's sort of like, if you had if you had 10 nuclear attack submarines, that's a huge deal, right? Like having a bigger cyber force, I don't think that's a huge deal. I don't think it changes the dynamics as much as having, an aircraft carrier.
Right. So it's cyber's really the underutilized 0.01% of the national budget. Just going there to waste. Thanks, Grugq.
Thanks, Tom.